Hey, it's Ryan with this week's Mille Fishing Report. It's getting to be late October. Water temps are starting to creep into the lower 50s, and the fall bite has been excellent. We'll get started with the muskies. You know, throughout most of the summer, I've talked about fishing the deeper weed lines, and those are going to continue to produce fish, until the end of the season. Wherever you can find good green cabbage in that 12 foot of water range is definitely going to hold muskies. However, at this time, a lot of my focus begins to shift. I'm going to start looking towards rocks. And the reason being is we have a major event coming up in muskie fishing, and that is the Tullibee spawn. So to give you a little background on what's happening is throughout the summer, the Tullibee, which is the main forage of the biggest muskies in the lake, lives out in the basin of Mille. They're roaming around out there in big schools, and they're feasting on bugs throughout the summer and into the fall. Once you get into late October, into November, their spawn begins, and they don't start spawning in October. They spawn when water temps hit the lower 40s, right around that 42 degree range. But the fish begin to stage and they move closer to rock reefs. They spawn on shallow rock reefs, but they start to move in from those offshore areas out in the basin, out in the abyss, and they start to congregate in areas around these rock reefs. It isolates a lot of fish, and consequently all the muskies that have been roaming out in the main lake all summer follow those fish in, because once the Tullibee spawn, it's easy pickings for the muskies. Mille has become famous in the recent decade for the giant fish it produces this time of year. Just in the last couple of seasons, Mille has kicked out the state catch and release record, which was, I believe, a little over 58 inches last year. And then the year prior, it kicked out the regular state record in November. So if you're looking for the fish of a lifetime, Mille is the place to be, and now is the time to be here. Now, when I fish the rocks at this time, there's kind of three different zones that I think of when I'm fishing for muskies on the rocks late fall. You have the tops of the reefs, you have the edges of the reefs, and then you have kind of the area around the reefs where the reefs transition into mud. So in the early stages, the Tullibee will congregate on that transition out in about 30 feet of water. A lot of guys will cast for muskies out here, but a lot of other guys will troll for them out there, just being that it's such a large area around those reefs that it's a lot more efficient to troll and cover a lot more water. It's also easier to use your electronics. You can see these schools of Tullibee on side imaging, and you can focus your efforts where you're seeing the most bait fish. When casting, I typically go shallower even early on. A lot of times it just seems like the shallower you go, the easier it is to fish. And those fish, even though the Tullibee might be out deep, will still come up on tops of the reefs, especially if you get a sunny day. A lot of people will also fish the edges, which I'll be doing as well. But there's a couple different baits that I like to use. When I'm fishing the tops, sometimes I'll use a crankbait and I'll try to cast it out and let it tick bottom and then drag it off the deep edge. That's been one of my favorite techniques when fishing the very tops of the reefs. But something that I use a lot more is swim baits, and you can either use the paddle tail or the curly tail swim baits. Both of them are very popular out here, and both of them work equally as well. But those swim baits are a lot more versatile. You can cast them up top, keep your rod tip high, and reel them off the edges. That catches a lot of fish. Or you can cast them out if you're fishing the deeper edges, let them sink down a little bit, and then just reel them in nice and easy. That catches a lot of the biggest fish out here as well. We're at the very beginning stages of this at this time, so you're going to start to see more and more big muskies come out of the lake as we get deeper and deeper into the season here. The next month, Mille is going to kick out some giant fish. Moving on to the walleyes, we've had an excellent fall walleye bite going on for the last few weeks. There's a few techniques that work really well at this time, and the first of which I'm going to cover is the fall night trolling. If you're looking to get out on some excellent fishing, trolling little stick baits, those 4 to 5 inch stick baits after dark up in the shallows, produces not only some giant fish, but it also produces a lot of numbers. It's a very popular technique out here. Guys have been doing it for years, and you'll have some of your best nights during the October full moon trolling those stick baits up in that 3 to 12 foot of water range. Now, when doing the fall trolling, you can either do it on weed lines or you can do it on rock piles. I prefer rock piles because it's less messy. You don't have to deal with the weeds. But either one of them can hold a lot of fish, and either one of them can produce excellent results. The colors I like for the stick baits are not really that important. There's a lot of them that have worked for me over the years, but my favorite is just the chrome blue silver with an orange belly. Other colors that are great are just natural bait fish patterns or fire tiger. A couple other techniques that work great during the daytime are going to be swim baits and jigs and minnows. The swim bait, it's pretty similar to what I do in the spring, just a little 3 to 4 inch paddle tail swim bait on a 1/4 ounce jig head. Cast it out, let it sink to the bottom, and reel it in slow. Produces a lot of fish, especially as you get into the cold fall months. It's just a great technique. It's easy to do. You get big ones, little ones, eater size fish. It kind of catches them all. Lastly is the jig and minnow bite. That's what we've been doing a lot of over the last couple of weeks. And the big thing with the jig and minnow is just matching the jig size to the depth of the water and the size of the minnow that you're using. If you're using a 3 to 4 inch minnow, a good size fathead or rainbow minnow, typically what I do is when I'm fishing that 10 foot of water range where we've been doing so well over the last couple of weeks, I'm just putting about an 1/8 of an ounce jig head. Now, if it's very windy, you might have to bump it up a size to a 3/16. If it's very, very calm, you may have to bump it down a size, maybe going with something like a 3/32. But that 1/8 ounce size is just a good starting point with about a 3 to 4 inch minnow. Typically what I do with the jigs is if I know there's a lot of fish in an area, I cast it out, I let it sink straight to the bottom, and then I may drag it just a little bit before I start fishing it. Sometimes it gets hit right away on that initial drag. Other times what I'm doing when I'm trying to cover a little bit of water is I do this kind of lift fall method where I'm just popping the jig up and then letting it coast down with my rod tip held straight up in the air. That seems to be the best method for me over the last couple of weeks. We've caught a lot of fish. We've had some great days using the jigs and minnows. And on top of all that, it's just a really fun way to catch walleyes. We've caught all different sizes doing this. We're catching them anywhere from 14 to 24 inches. So it's a great way to catch fish. It's a fun way to catch fish, and it will continue to get better as we get later into the fall. Now, when looking for locations for both the swim baits and the jigs and minnows, I would say stick in that 10 foot of water range, give or take a couple feet. We have got some fish a little bit shallower than that. We have got fish a little bit deeper, but somewhere in that 10 foot of water range, that's where we've been doing best. We've caught fish on weed lines doing this, and we've caught fish on just rock piles without any weeds at all. So look for fish, use your electronics. When you find some fish in an area, that jig and minnow will definitely get the job done. And lastly is the smallmouth bite. You know, we've had a fantastic fall out here. It's been really good. You know, we have had some up days where it's been excellent, and we've had some down days where it's been a little bit tougher, but overall it's been a great fall for the smallmouth. Now, there's a lot of techniques that were working throughout the fall for us. You know, we were using the Minnesota rigs, we were using swim baits, jerk baits, tubes, Ned rigs, you know, all of that stuff. And there's other techniques that were working as well. But as we get later into the fall, as these water temps really start to drop on us, there's two techniques that I'm going to focus on primarily. And one of which is going to be little swim baits, and the second is going to be bottom dragging baits such as Ned rigs and tubes. First of all is the swim baits. And I think I'm going to start with the location for this because it's kind of specific where I have my best results. What I like is long tapering points in the fall. And what I try to find on these points is the larger rock that's on them. So I'm looking, instead of that 12 foot of water or less, which I'm doing earlier in the fall, as we get later into the fall, I'm looking 12 feet of water or deeper. A lot of times I'm looking in that 18 to 24 foot range. With the swim baits, what I'm doing is I'm actually bumping the head size up to a 3/8 ounce head. Sometimes we'll go with a 1/4 ounce if it's calm enough. And then I'm going with a smaller swim bait. Big swim baits work great in the fall, but the little ones help you get down deeper using a smaller jig head. So when you're fishing those deep rocks, that smaller swim bait, that little bit larger jig head, it's still going to be a very finesse presentation. It's going to get you more bites even in the fall. What I like to do is when I find these deeper rocks on these long tapering points, I like to set up downwind from them and then make long casts over these rocks, and then just reel swim bait in very slowly, just keeping it a foot or so off of the bottom. And ideally what I want it to do is make some contact with the larger rocks that are down there. It's produced excellent results for us. It gets some really big fish. Generally, we don't catch small fish doing this. Most of the fish that we encounter doing this technique are going to be 4 pounds plus. The other technique that we're doing is a little bit different, but we're doing it in the same spots. We're not changing our location for this, but we're just presenting something different to the fish if they don't take the swim bait initially. And that technique is just the bottom dragging techniques. Now you can use the Ned rigs or the tubes. I kind of break it down one of two ways. If it's calmer out, I'll go with Ned rigs because it's more of a finesse presentation. But instead of using the TRDs, which I use throughout the summer, those little stick bait looking things, in the fall I'll use some sort of creature like a craw or a bug. And the reason I do that is the TRDs have a lot of action on the fall. When they fall, they really wiggle their way down to the bottom. When you use the creature type baits like a bug or a craw, they have a much more parachuted fall. They fall straight down. They don't have all that action, which sometimes I think when the water gets cold kind of turns the fish off. So I go with the creature style baits. I bump up the jig head size. A lot of times I'm going with a 3/16 or even a 1/4 ounce head when I'm fishing these deeper rocks. But I'll use the Ned rigs when it's calm. When it gets windy, I'll often opt for tubes. Now you can either use the 2.5 or 3.5 inch tubes, whichever one you prefer. We've done well on both. But I really bump up the jig head size on the tubes because I want to maintain direct bottom contact. I want to feel everything that's going on, especially when it gets really windy, especially when I'm fishing really deep like that. So the smallest size I'm typically using in the fall in the deeper water is going to be 3/8 of an ounce. And that's typically when I'm using those little 2.5 inch tubes. And it really gets down quick. It allows you to make consistent bottom contact. And it catches fish. You know, the tubes have always caught fish. So that's a great technique late in the fall. If I'm going with the 3.5 inch tube, I'm really gonna bump up the tube size again, the jig head size. So I may go with a 1/2 or a 5/8 or a 3/4, but I'm going very heavy with those tubes. That way I can make direct bottom contact even when it gets windy and conditions are a little bit tougher to fish in. So if you're looking to get out on Mille Lacs, you still got time. Water temps are still in that mid-50s, creeping into that lower 50-degree range. The smallmouth bite is going to continue at least for another week or two. The walleye bite, we still got a lot of good walleye fishing to go. We'll have another full moon coming up here. The muskies are just getting started right now. So there's a lot of opportunities still on the lake. I hope this information helps you out, and good luck out there.